everybody, this is Michelle, and today I'm sharing an easy Northern Lights snowy landscape I painted using watercolor. I'll start with my supplies. I'm going to use a pencil to sketch out a bit of the landscape. I'm also going to use a number 10 Princeton flat brush to lay down a lot of water for the sky. It allows me to do that quickly. I'll also use a number 8 round brush. I really like this one. And I'm painting on Arch's 140-pound watercolor cold press paper, which is a little bit toothier. It absorbs the water really nicely and creates a lot of nice blends. I have 2 cups of clean water, and I'll also use my 48 pan set of Mungyo watercolors. I really like this paint set. It offers me a lot of variety, and they're really high quality paints. I like to activate my paints with a spray bottle that I got from the dollar store a few years ago. I also have a paper towel that I use to dab off any extra water or paint from my brushes. And the last thing that I'll use is some washi tape to give my paintings a border. And I just kind of like the design. It's just fun to look at, and it does a good job. And to start, I'm going to activate my paints with my spray bottle. And I'll start mixing up a color for the sky. And so I'll use a few blues to get sort of the color that I want for a night sky. And you'll see that I scrub the paint pans with the side of my brush to transfer the paint to the brush. And I think that protects my brushes a little bit. It doesn't degrade the point of the brush very, as much as if I was going in there kind of like brush first, brush point first. And sometimes I'll use the spray bottle to add even more water because I'm going to use a lot of water for my mix. Because it's the Northern Lights, I'm also going to have some purples and greens and yellows just to kind of capture the variety of the colors in the night sky. Okay, now that I have my paints mixed up, I'll start with laying down some clean water in my sky. I want to fully wet the surface without allowing the water to pool. Otherwise, I'll get some blooms, which I don't really love that look. Occasionally, I'll pick up my paper when I'm doing work like this, just to look to see that for the shine on the surface of the paper to make sure that I have hit each area with water. And it also helps me to identify whether I have any pooling on the page, which, like I said, I want to avoid. And I'll begin with, once I've kind of wet the whole area, I'll begin with my lightest color in the sky, which is yellow. So remember, in watercolor, you want to go from lightest colors to the darkest. And once I kind of get some yellow down, I'll drop in my greens and teals and purples. And I'll just sort of play around with the colors and see how they're reacting on the page when I add them to my clean water on that page. It looks pretty terrible at the beginning. I'm not gonna lie. I usually feel that way about my paintings early on, and it really forces me to just sort of trust the process and keep playing around with the colors until I'm happy with the outcome. And I want to work a little bit quickly. Arch's watercolor paper is great paper because it keeps your page wet for longer. That's kind of the beauty of being 100% cotton. It holds the water a little bit better. But you still want to work quickly because you want to have your whole sky painted in before the initial layer of water that you put down dries. And that'll help you get kind of like a nice blend, and it'll prevent like harsh edges between the colors that you see on the page, which wouldn't look very natural. One of the things that I've noticed, so you'll see me putting in the blue and still not super happy with the colors that I'm seeing. So I'll go back to my Northern Lights and kind of keep playing around and seeing what works. And as I said, one of the things that I noticed about the Northern Lights, especially in the pictures, is the bits of white that you see around the colors. So a few times you'll notice me go in and clean off my brush and get it sort of just damp. And I'll pull up some of the paint so that I can get sort of like a little bit of a whiteness on the surface as well. Once I finish with the sky, I'll transition to mixing up paint for the trees and the snow. The trees are a mix of green and black since it's a nighttime scene. And I'm also going to use my tube of white gouache paint for the snow. Gouache is a thicker paint. You can get acrylic or water-based gouache. In this case, I use watercolor-based gouache. But the gouache allows me to paint over watercolor in some areas like the snow on the trees that you see. However, because it's nighttime, I don't want like a sheer stark white. That wouldn't really make sense. So I'm going to play around with mixing in other colors with this white to kind of bring it down a little bit. So I tried some like greens and blues and grays to get it to the color that I want for, you know, the effect of being what snow looks like at night. So I'll paint my gouache watercolor snow mix first, and it's gonna look pretty dark at first, but I try to add some water and clean my brush off at various points to pull up some of the paint just to provide a little bit of texture and variety so it's more interesting to look at. So next I'll use my green black mix to paint a pine tree. And this pine tree is in the foreground, so it'll be my largest tree. I'm planning on having trees in the foreground and in the background just to kind of create some visual interest. Pine trees are super fun to paint. They're one of my favorites to look at. I'm from the Northeast in the United States, so we have a lot of pine trees. I like seeing them in person, but I also kind of have fun painting them because I think they're kind of easy. You kind of just paint branches with pine needles sort of hanging off of them. I like that you can be sort of haphazard with it. You don't want it to be perfect. That's the nice part about painting objects in nature is they're not really perfect or symmetrical, so you don't have to be perfect. And you'll see I just kind of paint a branch, do some lines basically representing the needles off of that branch, and I just keep going with that all the way down the tree. Okay, so as I mentioned, I painted the rest of the trees in the same way, but I made them sort of smaller as you go back towards the forest to give that viewer a sense of perspective. So next I went back to my gouache based snow mix and I'm adding snow to my pine branches. And again, the gouache is a thicker consistency, and so it allows me to paint over a darker color, which you're normally not able to do with watercolor. Again, this is really fun for me. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's a great way to give the viewer a sense of depth and perspective with your trees, because I'm going to paint the foreground trees, the one that I'm working on right now, with a much lighter color gouache than I will with the background trees. So the background trees, I'll paint, the snow on them with like a little bit of a darker mix. So I'll put in like a little bit more gray, so that it would naturally look blurrier to you as you're looking further away. So you would want to recreate that effect with your painting as well. I'm adding some footprints headed back towards the northern lights. I just thought it looked kind of cool to have a set of footprints there because it looks like, people were there. So even though this is kind of like a remote area, I kind of like having the effect of people kind of tromping through these woods. And you'll see also I'm getting a little bit of clean water and activating the paint underneath the trees to give a little bit of a shadow on the snow that you would see kind of under the tree as well. And I'm doing that to even soften in the background, that row of trees, just to kind of make it look a little bit more natural. And the last thing I'll do is go back to my pure white gouache and load up my paintbrush to splatter on snow or stars, however you want to look at it. Um, I'm not really sure. I think, in my view, these are stars, but you could also see them as snow too. Um, Once I'm finished with that, the last thing, the very, very last thing I'll do is pull up my washi tape to reveal some nice clean lines. And there it is. I hope you enjoyed this, and please like and subscribe for more watercolor content.